Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of our exam reviews. It's a cold, rainy night here in the New York City area, but I'm glad that we were able to get this going. Today, remember, is Election Day, so over the course of the night, we'll have some fun looking at the polls, looking at the what the polls are, seeing who wins the governor race in New Jersey and in Virginia. Something that's interesting about tonight. We have live exam reviews going on, not just with me, but with other teachers also. Ms. Froelich and Ms. Bill are also doing the live stream, so it's going to be it's a fun evening. A lot of history going on tonight. A lot of history being discussed tonight. So I'm glad to see we're all excited for this. Good to see a bunch of people watching. So I am excited. Let me say a couple of things before we begin. First of all, what I want to say is a lot of you have spent a lot of time already studying for the test. A lot of you spent a lot of time reviewing. A lot of you spent a lot of time studying for the going through material for the test. A lot of you, for the test, it's the end all be all of everything. For a lot of you, the test represents who you are. The test represents everything about you. Tests are important. They are an important part of life. They are an important part of who you are as a student. Hi, Jessica. You want to say hi?
You won't get a job if you don't do well on his test.
No, she's not telling the truth. She's not telling the truth at all. Don't listen. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hello.
Tests are an important part of life, but they're not the end all be all. They're not the end all be all of life, and you guys need to understand that. And if you don't do well on this exam, if you perform poorly, everything will be okay. You'll go on, you will succeed. And for me, for my class, tests are not the end all be all. They're 30% of the grade, but there's a lot of other opportunity to do really well in the class.
In all seriousness, he's being really, really sincere. Really, he truly, truly means what he says. I promise you that he really, really means that.
It's true. So I just want to make that clear. And clearly, all you want to do well. Everyone wants to do well, and that's great. And you shouldn't. You should spend time doing well. And doing well after you study is a fantastic feeling. Is a great feeling. But I want to make sure that if you do put in a lot of time and you do put in a lot of work, I want to make sure that you do not feel, and if you don't do well, then I want to make sure that you realize this is not the end all be all. So let's start. Welcome everybody. Just FYI, polls have closed in Virginia and in New Jersey, according to CNN. Phil Murphy, the Democrat, has won the New Jersey's governor race. The Virginia gubernatorial race is a little too close to call, but we'll see what happens. You can see on the, there are two places to ask questions. You can use the chat feature on the side to ask questions. At the same time, you can also email me questions, and that's also fine. I'll be checking my email periodically during the night, so you can send me questions via email also. Okay, so let's get with the questions. I see there are not just sophomores here, but seniors who are watching, which is great, fantastic. You guys are more than welcome to stay, but I would just ask, please let the sophomores ask the questions and let them get the questions in when we need to talk about things. Okay. Let's start with the questions. Oh yes, there's coffee, by the way. Coffee is being consumed. You can see right here, coffee is absolutely being consumed. This is a particularly dark roast from Nespresso. A lot of very intense tastes. Dark chocolate, very heavy, but really, really good. Possibility that during the live stream I may have to get up to make another cup. So we'll see there. We'll see what happens. Okay. Okay. Let's start with some of the questions. And let me shout out to all of the seniors who are watching. Gallon Doward watching. Andrew Dennis on Fox. Who else is here from the seniors? I think that is it. Russell. Ooh, nice to see you, Russell. Fun stuff. Okay. Let's get to some of the questions that we have on the chat. Again, you can ask questions in the chat. You can ask questions via email. Okay. Let me just also be clear. Don't ask questions like, how much do I need to know? Or how much do I need to know about this? Ask a pointed question about something. Bye. Ask a pointed questions about something. I'm happy to answer. Okay. Let's see. First question. Rachel. England from Henry VIII through the Glorious Revolution. What happened during this time? A lot. Is that a good answer? No? Okay. Henry VIII, creation of the Anglican Church, 6 wives, eventually allows, eventually Mary and Elizabeth. First Edward becomes king, then Mary, then Elizabeth. The reign of Elizabeth. Again, many of you said in your papers, Elizabeth was not an absolute ruler. She was an absolute ruler, and that's fine. She was an absolute ruler, and that's something you do need to know. That's something that you need to remember. Again, she gives way to her cousin James I. James I is an absolute monarch. He creates offers a very, very strong arguments for absolute monarchy. His son Charles I becomes king. He gets into a big fight with Parliament. He wants to raise taxes. The Parliament won't let him. Particularly, he wants to raise taxes, and Parliament won't let him. Parliament gives him what's called the Petition of Right, which are demands that he has to agree to. He doesn't agree to them. Parliament doesn't meet from 1628 to 1640. Parliament is forced back into session in 1640 because he needs money to stop a revolt in Scotland. Parliament rebels. The English Civil War transpires. Cromwell becomes the Lord Protector, and then at that point, we have Charles II. And James II, and then the Glorious Revolution, in which William and Mary become king and queen. And the English Bill of Rights. So England then becomes a constitutional monarchy. Okay. Let's see. Oh, who is John Locke, and what were the books he wrote? We talked about John Locke the last couple of days. We talked about John Locke in the context of his letter on tolerance. We also talked about John Locke in the context of, his perspective on government. So he wrote this letter on tolerance. He also wrote the 2 treatises on government. So that question is done with, ooh, cool. I didn't realize that not only could I remove someone from the chat, but I can put them in a timeout. That's really cool. So, wow. That's pretty cool. So if you guys are not behaving, I can put you guys in a timeout. Who was Catherine supposed to marry at first when she was brought to England? She was supposed to marry Arthur, who was the eldest son of Henry VII and future Henry VIII's older brother. Okay. Did John Calvin get kicked out after being asked to be leader of Geneva? Yeah, he does. He's kicked out for a short period of time, and then he's invited to come back. We really didn't focus on that. So that's something we didn't really focus on. This is from Shalom. What are the details we need to know about the scientific revolution, like which theories and scientists? So this is particularly for the H level class. Whatever, everything that's mentioned in the review sheet. So roots of modern science, new models of the universe, scientific method, Newton, scientific revolution, spreads. Those are the chapter headings from the textbook. So what you need to know is basically that. You need to know what is mentioned in that context from the textbook. You don't need to know everything in detail, but you need to be able to talk with some degree of clarity about that material. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Which number Henry got married 6 times? That was Henry VIII. You don't need to memorize. You don't need to memorize what the all of Henry's wives, largely because they're not terribly important, except for really Catherine of Aragon. So I wouldn't necessarily memorize all of their all of his wives. Okay. Let's see. Again, when there's a difference between H and A, I will let you know. Okay. I'm just going through the questions here. Blah, blah, blah. Coffee, hot chocolate. Oh, come on. There's no question. Coffee is always better than hot chocolate. So, yeah. Cheers, everybody. What's the takeaway from John Calvin on predestination? So that's one of the primary sources that both the A and the H are responsible for. What you have to know is Calvin offers a unique perspective on the issue of how you enter heaven that is tied to the issue of predestination. Much of what John Calvin says actually does not differ in a considerable amounts from what Luther offers in terms of his ideas. What he does differ in is in regards to how do you enter heaven. And Calvin basically says, and this again has to do with predestination, is that it doesn't matter if you are a great person, if you do good works, if you believe in God, if you have faith alone, which Luther says is what you need in order to enter heaven. What Calvin says, it's literally predetermined by God who enters heaven or not. Calvin says that God has already predetermined who is part of the elect, meaning who enters heaven and who does not enter heaven. In that context, what Calvin says is, if you are doing good works, if you are a good person, if you're a good Christian, that shows the world that you are part of the elect. Okay. Well, there are a lot of questions here. Okay. Yeah, and so that's the issue of predestination. Okay. Okay. So again, for Calvin, meaning if you are a good person, if you do good works, that shows that you're part of the elect. This is where we get the idea of the Protestant's work ethic. If you work hard, if you work well, if you are a good person, that shows that you are part of the elect. That shows you are part of the people who have been elected to enter heaven. Okay. That is done. What is the takeaway from Immanuel Kant? Was ist Aufklärung? Well, Kayla, you seem to be just asking me to explain all the primary sources. That's very interesting. So for Kant, for that source, again, the focal point is he identifies what the key motto of the Enlightenment is, which is sapere aude, have the courage to basically have the courage of your convictions, have the courage to break away from the tutelage, have the courage to say, I am no longer going to simply rely on other people. I've been seeing a couple of questions. In regards to Luther, Luther is not on the test. Okay, Luther is not on the test. So that's what you should keep that in mind. Okay. John O'Cats, hi, how are you? Yes, I'm reading. I see. Okay. So in terms of that, you don't need to. It's not on the exam. You don't need to worry about that. Don't worry about Luther. The exam starts with the Anabaptists, Calvin, and the English Reformation. So don't focus on Luther. Don't focus on Zwingli. Okay. Can I explain deism? Deism is the belief that God exists. God is the watchmaker. I mean, God had created the universe. God had created the world, set in motion, set nature in motion, and then departed. Meaning God does not have any day-to-day responsibility, day-to-day activity with the world, and is not interested in engaging in the world. What deism calls for, or deism in general, deism is not associated with an established religious doctrine, meaning it doesn't require you to take up any religious action. You don't need to pray. You don't need to take any religious action in that regard. It's a very simplistic perspective because it just requires you to believe in God. Okay. No, Cromwell is not a king. He is the Lord Protector. Let's see. Dukas, what's on the test? Everything. Okay. That's good. You mentioned the wars of religion. Do we only have to know the war we learn in our groups? So for the A-level classes, for the wars of religion, you need to know your specific wars. And there will be a question in which which I will ask you to take the war that you focused on. And yes, I do know who focused on which war, and to talk a little bit about it in the context of other things. So yes, you do need to know that. Okay. Is the Anglican Church just Queen Elizabeth's way of combining Protestants and Catholics to create a religious peace? No, the Anglican Church is the Church of England as established by Henry VIII. The Church of England that Henry VIII establishes is called the English Church for the first time in the Act of Supremacy, which gives him and gives the monarchs of England the role of leader of the Church of England. And so it's in the Act of Supremacy, it was literally called the Anglican Church. So the Church of England is called the Anglican Church. Okay. Can I go through the different monarchs in Europe and what religions they practice? Morgan, you have to be a little more specific than that. Okay. Okay. Shayna, do we have to know the details of the Petition of Rights? For the honors class, yes. You need to know the details of the Petition of Right as was mentioned in the textbook and what was taught in terms of the primary sources as well. The focal points of the Petition of Right, again, this is really for the honors class, is the fact that Parliament wanted Charles I to not to raise taxes on his own. They wanted to ensure that all of the various aspects of Magna Carta and previous agreements were adhered to. They wanted to make sure that the king wouldn't simply throw people in jail when they disagreed with him. The Petition of Right, the focal point of the Petition of Right very much was to keep the king in check while ensuring that Parliament still retains some sense of power. So that's the major aspect of the Petition of Rights. Again, a lot of what the Petition of Right talks about, a number of the articles of the Petition of Right talks about money and talks about no one can be forced to give the king money. No one can be imprisoned because they're not helping the king. It's very much trying to limit the absolute power of the monarch, mentioning, for instance, habeas corpus, that habeas corpus needs to be respected. Those are all very important aspects of the Petition of Right. Okay. Let's see. From David, which philosophers of the Enlightenment should we focus on? What about them should we look at? You need to look at what's mentioned in the textbook. You need to know what's mentioned in class. So whatever was mentioned in class, whatever is included in the textbook, that's what you need to include. The textbook does include some aspects that we didn't have a time to talk about in class. Again, this is more for the honors class than for the non-honors class. Let's see. Let's see. Meaning it mentions textbook mentions Hobbes, it mentions Locke. Let's see. It mentions Voltaire also a bit, Montesquieu. It does mention Rousseau. So yeah, those are the individuals that you should be familiar with. Again, we're not getting everything. We can't get everything to in class, but you should at least be familiar with that stuff. Okay, let's move on. This is fun. I love doing this. This is good, great stuff. Let's see. A lot of questions coming up. I'm going to go through these questions one by one, okay? So we still have plenty of time. So there's a lot of questions, but we'll get to as much as we can. Okay. Let's see. There's a question about Cromwell. What does Cromwell do? I mean, Cromwell, first and foremost, is he's a military leader. He takes power in 1649. Cromwell is a Puritan, and there were many Puritans in Parliament. Puritans were Protestants, specifically Anglicans, who believed that the Anglican Church hadn't done enough to rid itself of Catholicism. The Puritans were, in their minds, puritanical. They wanted to be pure of the Catholic Church, and Cromwell was part of the Puritans. What Cromwell does is he abolishes the monarchy, he abolishes the House of Lords. He does establish a commonwealth, a republican kind of government, but eventually Cromwell becomes a military dictator. He takes up power. He does terrible things, particularly to the Irish. Puritans, and with Cromwell, attempt to reform society. They made laws. Let's see. It's strange. They reform society in that they promote Puritan laws. They abolish activities that they thought that were sinful, theater, sporting events, dancing, etc. That's what Cromwell does. So something that he does, which we didn't mention, is he also allows the Jews to come back to England because they were thrown out in 1290. Okay. Let's see. Anyone have trouble getting on to the live stream, by the way? I just got a text from Rabbi Patinsky that students is having trouble getting on. I just want to see if anyone had difficulty getting on to the live stream. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Let's see. More questions. By the way, I'm not answering any questions about the readings that you have for H or for A. Those you are doing on your own, so I'm not taking up any of those, okay? Let's see. I think there. Yeah, very strange. Let's see. Oh, CNN just called the race in Virginia. It looks like the Democrat won the gubernatorial race in Virginia. So interesting. Okay, that's fun. Okay, let's get back to the questions. What is it's a clear explanation of Anabaptists as opposed to an unclear explanation of Anabaptists? Anabaptists were Protestants who believed that infant baptism, which was the norm under the Catholic Church, shouldn't be practiced, that people should be taking up religion willingly, and that baptism should only occur when they are adults. Okay, that's good. Dukas, was Queen Elizabeth Henry VIII's wife? No, Queen Elizabeth was Henry VIII's daughter. Okay. From Evan, what is a general summary of the governments of Russia, Austria, and Prussia? Okay, so this is something specific for the honors classes and not the A-level classes. So this is for the honors classes. Let's see. First of all, just know that serfdom was brought back into the East, in Eastern Europe as opposed to Western Europe, and that's important in terms of creating an economic context for the rise of and the power that local lords had. Serfdom between 1500 and 1650 became extremely popular in the East. So that's something very important. The Habsburgs in Austria know about the fact that the Habsburgs were victorious over Bohemia during the 30 Years' War. They were able to expand their lands. The Habsburgs were able to establish direct rule over Bohemia. That's important. Ferdinand III continued to build the power. The Habsburgs attempted to overtake Hungary, but the Hungarian nobility were able to, particularly between 1620 and 1703, the Hungarians were able to basically hold off the Habsburgs from conquering them. And so in Prussia, we have Frederick William, the great elector of Prussia. Eventually, he becomes the king of Prussia. He's able to create financial independence for the Prussia itself. And under William I, he's able to continue what his grandfather had done. He is able to assert complete and absolute power. He establishes Prussia into an absolute military state. He was an avid military man, and by the middle of the 18th century, Prussia had one of the great armies in all of Europe. Okay, I think that's good enough with Prussia. And with Russia, you need to, again, this is for the H-level class, talk about the rise of the fact that the Mongols, after 200 years, were pushed aside by basically the governors of Moscow, or the princes of Moscow. Ivan III in 1480 was able to push off the rule and declare the autonomy of Moscow. In the early 16th century, Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, comes to the throne at a fairly young age, and he rules as an absolute monarch. He rules through fear and intimidation. He's able to consolidate power and consolidate authority in a central way. Life, though, for the Russian people was extremely hard. Russia's able to push into areas, including in the east, including Siberia. They're able to become much wealthier because of the natural resources of this land. Peter the Great becomes king Tsar in 1682. He begins a number of processes. First of all, the westernization process, travels around Western Europe for a period of time. He tries to expand the land by attacking Sweden. Sweden is able to defeat the Russian allies. He transitions to the nobility so that they're all part of the army or civil administration. He requires service he requires service in the military for common people. They are able to take some significant lands, specifically in the Ukraine, and to add that to and to grow Russia as well. And again, Peter's reforms are important. They were extremely unpopular with the nobility in Russia. So yeah, that's it. Okay. Is Ulrich Zwingli the leader of the Anabaptists? No. What happens if we are allergic to the tests? Wow, Eitan Dugas, that's a fantastic question. If you are allergic to the tests, I don't know what to tell you. I think you're going to have a very difficult time. Anabaptists, we explained to Anabaptists, Luther is not on the test. Louis the 14th. So some of you need to know, first of all, just the backgrounds of where Louis the 14th comes from. Remember and recall the foundations of absolutism in France. Henry IV, the founder of the Bourbon dynasty, that is Louis XIV's grandfather. He himself is a Protestant. He becomes Catholic. He enacts the Edicts of Nantes, allowing for Protestantism to continue to exist in France. When he dies, Marie de Medici becomes head of the government for her 9-year-old son, Louis XIII. And then we have a series of two important ministers in France. Cardinal Richelieu, who really establishes for Louis XIII and for Louis XIII and for eventually Louis XIV a system of governance, of using commissioners for France's districts appointed directly by the monarch, and they're responsible to report to him. Richelieu recruits people for the army, collects or supervises the collection of taxes. Now, under Richelieu, this is something that's going to continue, and this is something that is important. Protestantism was repressed. Richelieu gave way to Cardinal Mazarin, who for Louis XIV was tremendously helpful in continuing many of these policies. Louis XIV comes to the throne. He was, according to all the reports that we have, and this includes the primary source, the Duc de Saint-Simon, he was, for all intents and purposes, he was a hard worker, and he gave a lot to work. Again, the Duc de Saint-Simon, in his discussion of Versailles, it was very clear that he worked very hard. He wasn't necessarily the best at the government. He wasn't the most talented, but he did work very hard. Versailles, Louis XIV builds up the Palace of Versailles. The Palace of Versailles becomes a center of power for him and for his nobles. He brings all the nobility to Versailles. Versailles was built by his father as a hunting palace. He makes it much larger, much bigger. He moves the center of life basically from Paris. Paris was still the capital, but Versailles was the seat of government. It was just a huge palace. And what Louis XIV does in Versailles is he revolutionizes or changes the court life so that he becomes the center of everything. He is seen as everything. And we talked about, again, this is in the kind of context of the honors class, we talked about Habermas's theory of the public sphere. So the fact that Louis the 14th revolutionizes court life in this way, to show that he is the center. Rituals becomes very important. There are rituals for every aspect of what Louis XIV did, from waking up in the morning to going to sleep at night. This is part of the representational culture that existed, that was eventually replaced by the public sphere. Again, part of what Louis XIV's court is all about is also the finances of France. Mercantilism is an important aspect of this. You should also, Louis XIV wanted to expand the territories around France, wanted to make sure that France had basically a buffer around them. He wanted to push out, and he wanted to include areas that were part of the Spanish Netherlands, Flanders. He also was interested in challenging the Habsburgs to some degree. He eventually comes to an agreement, the Peace of Utrecht, and yeah, I think that's basically it. He dies in 1715. Is the longest ruler in Europe. Yeah. Okay. Good. Wow. With the questions, if I explained the questions, I'm not going to explain them again, just because you can go back and watch the video afterwards to find the answers. Okay. Let's see. I did that. Do we need to know dates? You need to know every single date and the meaning of every single date. And if I will ask you on the test a date, let's say 1555 or 1603 and 1620 or 1627, and you will be expected to write everything you know about that date. No, I'm kidding. You need to know some dates. Some dates are important. But if you tell me, for instance, that the English Civil War happens in the middle of the 17th century, that's fine. I don't care if you can tell me it happened between 1642 and 1650. If you tell me that Elizabeth lives or is a monarch in England in the second half of the 16th century, that's fantastic. That's great. Okay. Okay. Wow, a lot of questions here. Cute wedding pics. Thank you very much. Yeah, those are old already. Those are old already. It's going to be 11 years in January. It's a long time. How did William and Mary come to power? They came to power because Parliament wanted a Protestant monarch. They were not interested in keeping a Catholic monarch in England. They were afraid that future monarchs in England would be Catholic. They wanted a Protestant monarch, and therefore they invited William and Mary to come to England to conquer it and to take over. Basically, they were invited to conquer. Okay. What is the main difference between absolutism and constitutionalism? Wow, that's a question which is a loaded question. Absolutism, absolute rule. Constitutionalism is rule. Governments derives its power and is limited by a set of laws. Let's see. The Glorious Revolution is the rise of William and Mary. Okay. Let's see. What are the differentiations of the Anglican Church from the other branches of Christianity? Shana, that's a good question. Many of the, in fact, oh, hey, Julia. How are you? Nice to see you. Oh, Shoshi, you're here too? Whoa, crazy. This is so much fun. the let's see. What were we talking about? We were talking about difference between the Anglican Church and other branches of Christianity. When Henry VIII first establishes the Anglican Church, there's actually very little that differentiates it from actually Catholicism. It mostly is the same. Really, Henry VIII establishes the Anglican Church because the Pope refuses to give him an annulment to his marriage, and so he decides to create this church in order to get the annulment through Parliament. Now, Henry VIII, again, is not really interested in creating new religious doctrine. It's up to his son Edward to really begin to change the Anglican Church so that it moves away from Catholicism. And it's under Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who, first of all, writes 2 books of common prayer, developing a totally new liturgy, prayer service for the Anglican Church to use. And then secondly, it is also Cranmer who also begins to change the belief system, particularly when it comes to what were the necessary aspects of dogma of belief, what rituals were needed to be done. But in terms of differentiation, that's basically all of it. Okay. Let's see, Russia, we went over for the honors class. Prussia, we went over. Do we need to know what habeas corpus is? Yes, habeas corpus it goes back to the Magna Carta, meaning which states that someone is arrested, they can't just be thrown in prison, they have to be told what they are being arrested for. Okay. Good. Let's see, Austria, Prussia. Again, if I went, I did go over for the honors class. I did go over. Where is baby Olivia? Yeah, Olivia and Nathaniel are both sleeping. Thank goodness. Okay. So thank goodness everyone is sleeping. Jessica is out at the gym, and I'm here by myself. So she'll be back at some point, probably after we finish. So, okay. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to some of the questions. Do we need to know about the Diet of Augsburg or the Schmalkaldic League? No. Economics, no. Economics is just for the A level. You just need to know Adam Smith. That's what we talked about. Who's the person to come up with the idea that state and church should be separate? That is John Locke. Okay. Do we need to know anything about the most recent project we did in class? What's the most recent project? We need to know about the early modern governments, particularly in France and in England. Okay. What do we know about France during Louis XIV? We went over this. Let's see. And how much detail do we need to know about the scientific revolution? This is from Zoe. You need to know every single word that the textbook writes. No, you need to know the general ideas, some of the important people that were mentioned by the textbook. Let's see, scientific revolution. And this is for, again, the honors class specifically. So, sorry, just my computer's acting strange. Blah, blah, blah. Right, so in terms of what you need to know about the scientific revolution, you need to know the broad points that are mentioned by the textbook. I'm just trying to get the textbook open here on my computer. Let's see. Whoa. Cheers. So Zach has asked the question a couple of times. Should we be focusing on big ideas or details? Focus on big ideas. Again, you do need to know. You need to know some detail, and some detail does need to be included in talking about the big ideas. But the point is, I don't expect you to know everything about everything. It's impossible. Okay, meaning you need to be able to tell me, for instance, what Copernicus thinks in terms of the heliocentric theory of the universe. If you tell me that, for instance, if you don't write, for instance, what Copernicus's book is called in the Revolutions of the Heavenly Bodies, nothing's going to happen to you. I'm not gonna be, that's detail that just isn't important. But you need to know the fact that, for instance, that Johannes Kepler continued the work of Copernicus, is able to prove what Copernicus had to say. Know a little bit about Galileo, the fact that Galileo conflicts with the church. You need to know that Galileo was testing what was again trying to prove Copernicus's theory. Talk a little bit about, again, the focal point isn't for you to memorize everything, but have a good sense, something of a sense of what the things are that are being discussed. So I know I have to make more coffee soon, and I'm gonna make more coffee in a couple of minutes. This is since I came home, this is my third cup already. So yeah, a little bit crazy. I know. All right, more questions. Can I go over the line of royalty in England? If we start from Henry VIII, Edwards. There's one person who we didn't actually mention, who Lady Jane Grey. She rules for a total of 8 days, but that's not really important. Mary, Elizabeth, James, Charles, Cromwell, Charles, James, and then William and Mary. Okay. Can I explain the structure of the test? Okay. So again, the test is in 2 parts. The first part is based on the reading that you have. The reading will be, the questions will be reading comprehension, but also tying into what we discussed in class, what you read in the textbook. Okay. Let's see. What happened in the 30 Years' War? The 30 Years' War was a war of Protestants versus Catholics. There are multiple parts of the 30 Years' War. Basically, no one wins, but the end result of the 30 Years' War really is what is important, in that Protestants are fully recognized in the Holy Roman Empire as having rights. Not just Lutherans, but all forms of Protestantism is allowed. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Who is the video sponsored by? No one tonight, but I do want to shout out to all of our subscribers in Outer Mongolia. Those who are watching in Mongolia tonight, those who are watching in Uzbekistan, and those who are watching in New Zealand. Cheers! Thank you guys for watching. Okay. Did James II ignore the Anglican Church when he ruled as a Catholic? Yeah, that's a good question, Shana. Yeah, basically he does, and that's one of the reasons why Parliament was unhappy. Parliament, when James II becomes king, again, Charles II's brother, they're extremely perturbed about the possibility that that England will have a Catholic line of kings. So that is one of the reasons why they invite William and Mary to come to England and take over, basically, in 1688. Okay. Kayla, nice to see you. Glad you can come. Shoshi, who's worse, Louis XIV or Trump? That is not going to get an answer. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to make more coffee in a minute. I think it's really important. Okay. I guess let me ask the seniors. Do you have nothing else to do with like your time tonight? Like I'm sure. Like I'm sure you guys have more to do with your time than sitting here watching us talk about history for a while. Okay. How do I fall asleep with all the coffee? That's a good question, Julia. I do it a lot. Very simply, like last night, I was literally sitting at my dining room table and I just fell asleep. That was after 2 cups of coffee after I got home last night. So yeah, pretty crazy stuff. All right, more questions. You do not need to know Luther's 3 critiques, so don't worry about that. Let's see. Remember, Luther is legally not on the exam, so don't worry about that. Okay. Let's see, more questions. For all those who are asking, this is a sweater. Okay, don't worry, this is a sweater. No, I said hi to Kayla. This is a sweater. Okay, more questions. Mitch, what does Kant mean when he writes, we do not live in an enlightened age, but we live in the age of enlightenment? What Kant is saying there is that the period of time in which he's living in is not fully, completely enlightened, meaning everyone has not been able to realize the model of the enlightenment of superiority, of using your own, of having your own convictions. We do live in an age, according to Kant, where people are enlightened. This isn't an age of enlightenment where people have done this. But I think the difference that Kant is making is whether everyone has thrown off that yoke of relying on other people. And Kant's answer is no, we haven't. Kant's answer is we still live in an age where people are doing so. People have not thrown off the yoke of listening to other people, and so we do live in an age of enlightenment when that does happen, when that did happen. Okay. Okay. Other questions from sophomores? Do I have drop-in? I don't have drop-in hours, largely because I teach 7 classes, so I'm sorry. Will we have the reading on the test? You will absolutely have the reading on the test, yes. You can't bring your own copy of the reading, but you will have the copy of the reading as you see it on Haiku. I print out copies that go with the test. So you absolutely have you absolutely will have the reading on the examination. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. You honestly don't have the other stuff to do. That's great. Okay. Other questions. Let's see. Looking for other questions here. From Zoe's, it's smart to read over the textbook. Does that cover all the material? The textbook covers a lot of the material, Zoe. And what the textbook does is that it provides, it's a good way of providing for you a narrative of everything. So again, for instance, for both England and France, now to be sure, what you read and what you were taught from the textbook readings on Haiku, there's a lot there. There's a lot of information there. But the textbook provides a good narrative for you guys, so that's important. Do we need to know who states which theory for emergent theories of absolutism? Yeah, so you should know Bodine, Bousset, and Hobbes. Yes, you should know that. Okay. Zoe's the reading just explaining how the Enlightenment spread. I'm not going to answer that. Shia, what does it mean that Henry convened Parliament? What does that mean? So with that we're talking about that in the context of Henry creating the Anglican Church. Remember, England has parliaments. Parliaments was a center of power that rivaled the king. But in order for Henry to get the to have his marriage annulled, he wanted parliaments to do it. And so one of the powers that the King of England has, and this is true until the Glorious Revolution, until William and Mary, is that the kings were in the position, the kings had the right to call parliament into session. So Henry calls parliament into session, meaning he calls parliament to meet. He has them pass the Act of Supremacy, which gives him the power to establish the church. It also does away with his marriage. Now, again, Parliament has this power. Excuse me, the king has this power through the Glorious Revolution. This is why, for instance, Charles I is able to rule from 1629 through 1640 without calling Parliament into session. It's called the years of personal rule, where Parliament doesn't meet between 1629 and 1640, and he's able to rule by himself. Now, the problem with that in the context of England is that the king can only do so much. The king can't raise taxes on his own. So this is the problem with Charles I when he had to face a growing rebellion in Scotland in 1639 and 1640. He couldn't raise money to raise an army, and so he has to go back to Parliament to call them into session in order to raise the money that he needs. Parliament wasn't willing to do that, and that leads to the Civil War. But under the Glorious Revolution, under William and Mary, and under the English Bill of Rights, Parliament is called into session on regular intervals. So the king and queen don't have the exclusive authority to call the Parliament into session. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Can we get the essays about absolutism before? Yeah, I'll try my best. I'm going to try to finish them tonight, but there are a lot, and I have a lot of essays to grade. Okay, so yeah, try my best. Do we need to know about all the early modern governments, even if we weren't a part of that group? You need to know, first of all, what's in the textbook. You need to know for England and for France, and you also need to know what you were taught by the other groups. So you need to have a broad sense of, and a general sense of what happens in England, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia as well. Yes, that's for the honors class specifically. Okay. Good. Are my tests easier than Mr. Kastner's tests? That's a good question, Kayla. I don't know. I think they're about the same. If I see that you're on the right path in answering a question, I'm going to, give you guys credit. I am not interested in seeing you guys struggle. I want to see you. I want to see you guys succeed. So that's what I want to see. I don't want you to fail. So that's the reality. So yeah. How many pages is my test? A page, maybe. Hello, Talia. Zach, your test seems beyond impossible, to be completely honest. It's really not. The test is not really, it's not beyond impossible. It's not a piece of cake, but it's an assessment of what you should know. Okay, let's see. And again, it's not that many questions. You guys will have plenty of time to finish the exam. Let's see. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. how does the public sphere create a perfect environment for the Enlightenment? What the public sphere does, it's a question from Rachel, and it's a question really for the honors class specifically. The public sphere allows for the Enlightenment to grow. So according to Habermas, the creation of the public sphere allows for enlightenment to spread, and allows for the ideas of the enlightenment to take hold, not just by the people who were considered the elites, those who were considered to be the super intellectuals, but it allows for the ideas to spread amongst the common man, the common people. It allows for the ideas to spread in coffee houses and salons, etc. So the public sphere, again, the rise of the coffee house, the rise of newspapers, of literary journals, etc., gives the Enlightenment the opportunity to spread to a wide audience. Must we know where the branches of Christianity spread to? No, meaning you need to know, for instance, again, in France, we're talking about Calvinism, in England, Anglicanism. But no, you don't need to know, for instance, who and what is practiced in Sweden or who and what is practiced in Denmark, etc. Do you take points off for the more we write? So on the test, I will tell you for parts 1 and parts 2, I want to see between, let's say, 4 and 5 sentences. I want you guys to understand, and again, I'm going to just repeat this as many times as possible. I'm not asking for comprehensive, completely comprehensive answers. I'm not asking you to recite the entirety of what we learned. What I'm asking you to do is show me that you know something. Show me that you know what you're talking about. Show me that you have a good sense. You have a sense that you know something of what you're talking about. You'll have choice on the test. You can pick and choose what you feel comfortable with. Are you going to feel comfortable at everything necessarily? No, but you'll have choice on the test. How many definitions of the Enlightenment do we need to know? For the honors class, we talked about, again, we gave the class definition, we gave the definition of Kant, and that's what we did in the A class also. And then we also talked about definition offered by Moses Mendelssohn in the honors class. We also talked about Habermas, so you need to know those definitions also. Okay. I talked about France already during the reign of Louis XIV. I'm not going to come to that. Okay. Yes, we did talk about the Glorious Revolution is William and Mary. We talked about that. Sorry, you read about that. You read about that in the context in the textbook. You read about that. You were taught about that in the project also. Okay. Are you tired? I am tired. Yeah, that's why I'm drinking more coffee. Blah blah blah. Okay. How many questions are there on the test? I think you'll have to answer 9, maybe 10 questions, okay? In total. Okay. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I am tired. Okay. Hobbes thought that we should have a strong central government, but what does Locke think we should have? Locke does not believe in a strong absolute government, what Locke believes in is having a legislature, having an executive branch, and having a judicial branch. Locke believes in having different branches of government. Now, he also believes in having, in that the branches of government need to have checks and balances. This is something that Montesquieu, the French philosopher, is going to argue for in his work on the spirit of the law. But Locke believes this as well. He believes that a legislature, the point of the legislature is to pass laws, and the executive is to enforce those laws. So that's the form of government that he believes in. He also does believe in. He also believes in a judiciary that is independent. Okay. Good. What does Christianity, not the mysterious, talk about? That's Toland's book on explaining that talks about religion as a natural aspect. John Toland is one of the earliest deists. He believes that religion is natural, and we see God in nature. He doesn't believe in the miraculous. The miraculous doesn't exist, and so that's what he believes in. Okay. Okay. Other questions? What is Calvinism? John Calvin. We spent time talking about Calvin. He comes to Switzerland. He establishes a theocracy, strict government based on religious principles, religious ideas. Okay. Other questions? We got a lot of questions here. Holy cow. A lot of questions. Other questions? What's a simple explanation for progress and reason? Progress and reason, so this is something, again, this is what the, this is something that is, that defines the Enlightenment. Progress and reason, using logic, using reason, as opposed to simply relying on religion or focused on supernatural explanations for what happens in the world. Progress means to progress. That means to move beyond. In the context of the Enlightenment, it means to move beyond religion as a primary way of explaining everything. That the world doesn't just operate according to Enlightenment philosophers, many Enlightenment philosophers, because God wished it so. Reason is using the mind that you have, that God gave you, to intuit things, to understand things, and not using religious explanations to explain the world around us. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Can I explain Habermas's views on enlightenment? Sure. So we talked about what Jürgen Habermas argues for in his views on the Enlightenment is he differentiates between the representational culture, and this is for the honors class specifically, the representational world, which defines much of the early modern period, Louis XIV, the representational culture of monarchy, of strong absolute monarchy, and it begins to be slowly replaced by the creation of what he calls the public sphere. The public sphere is made up of a variety of aspects, including the coffee house, including the rise of newspapers, literary journals, etc. And the Enlightenment, according to Habermas, is able to continue to, not just to rise, but is able to continue to gain popularity and to spread because of the emergence of the public sphere. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Let's see. A couple of you have asked the definition of the Enlightenment. We define the Enlightenment by saying the Enlightenment is a period in which cultural, intellectual forces emphasize progress and reason. This leads to the emphasis on progress and reason, on progressing away from what was the defining characteristics of the Middle Ages, which is religion, and relying on religion to explain everything. And that's also the case for the early modern period. The emphasis on reason, on using the abilities that you have, on your logic and your thinking abilities. The emphasis on progress and reason begins to change the way that people think about issues of liberty, tolerance, thinking about the nature of government, thinking about the nature of religion. What progress and reason, again, emphasis on progress and reason leads to a completely new rethinking of things. And this rethinking will have consequences for a long time on. Okay. Do we have to know anything in the Book of Common Prayer? Not the A-level class. The H does. Okay. Water. Good stuff. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see what else is going on here. Okay. We need to know about the Book of Common Prayer, what I said before, what I mentioned a couple of a little while ago. Okay. Blah, blah. Let's see. When was the coffee house created? We talked about the coffee house in both classes by the by the end of the 17th century, there were more than 3,000 coffee houses in England. So by the end of the 17th century is what you need to know. Okay. Okay, good. Definition of the Enlightenment. I said that a couple of minutes ago. Okay, good. What does it need to know about the Book of Common Prayer? Just what I said before. Again, what I said a little while ago. Cranmer creates the two books of Common Prayer, establishes a new liturgy for England. He curtails the number of beliefs that the Anglican Church has. That's basically it. Okay. But the point is that during the reign of Edward, during the reign of Edward, it's during the reign of Edward that the Anglican Church begins to begins to change in dramatic ways. Okay, as opposed to under Henry VIII. Again, Henry VIII, while he establishes the Anglican Church in terms of its doctrine, in terms of really creating a difference between it and the Catholic Church, then it doesn't really do very much. But in reality, under Edward, we begin to see real changes. Now, something with Elizabeth. Elizabeth understands that there were many Catholics in England during her reign, and Elizabeth is actually, in comparison to Edward, much more, and especially compared to Mary, much more tolerant of opposing religious views. Mary, Queen Mary, she's known as Bloody Mary because she kills many Protestants. Gets rid of them. That's why she's known as Bloody Mary. But Elizabeth actually does allow for some Catholic ritual to be incorporated into the Protestant church. And so that is part of the way that Elizabeth at least makes overtures towards the Catholics in a way that Mary doesn't do with the Protestants. Okay. What is the state of nature and the social contract? Do both Hobbes and John Locke talk about it? Yes. So in terms of the state of nature and the social contract, both Hobbes and Locke, that's their starting point in the state of nature. Everyone is selfish. Everyone is looking out for themselves. Hobbes goes into greater detail about this in saying that in the state of nature, nothing is possible because the reality is that we're just looking for ourselves, out for ourselves. There can be no culture. There can be no economy. There can be no anything because we're just looking for ourselves. That leads to, both in Hobbes and Locke's mind, the creation of the social contract, meaning as a group of people, we all agree to the social contract, meaning we all agree to come together to a government and to a series of laws. The difference, of course, is what is that government and what is those set of laws, and that's where Hobbes and Locke differ primarily. Okay. Explain the primary source from Kant. I did that already before, earlier in the reading, in the live stream, so I'm not going to go over that again. Okay. Blah. There's some questions about the War of Spanish Succession. It's not, again, so it leads to the Treaty of Utrecht. It's so you know what? It's just in terms of it's not going to appear on the test, so don't worry about the. It's just not worth getting into. Okay, so don't worry about it. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Seniors, let's cut it out for a little bit while. We only have about 15 minutes left, so let's. If there are there any other questions from the sophomores? What does Benedict Spinoza say? Okay, so this is something related to. This is something we're going to come back to, in both the H and the A class. By the way, we have a great for you guys when we start our Jewish history unit, beginning either on Friday or next week. Spinoza is very much. We talked about deism. We talked about the fact that deism is the idea that we can see God in nature, that God is natural, that the world that we see around us, with what we see in nature, really is representative of the divine. This idea, we said, is found in John Toland's work, but in reality, we look at the work of Benedict Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza. We see this very much emerge both in his religious political treatise as well as in his ethics. So that's the idea, again, that when we look at nature, we see the divine, we see God. And that's really the only aspect of religion that Spinoza believes in. This is why he was excommunicated by the Jewish community in the Netherlands. Because for him, nature, when we look at nature, we see God. Every other ritual, every other aspect is not important. Okay. Okay. What are the characteristics of absolute rule? We talked about the different characteristics of absolute rule, both in the H and the A classes. We talked about, in terms of absolutism, we talked about in understanding absolute rule, the relationship between monarchs and nobles, depending on what that relationship looks like, is an indication of the absolutism. We talked about the expanding state structures. Absolute monarchs extend their authority by expanding structures of state. We talked about warfare. Absolute states are defined by a large standing army and going to using that army. And we talked about absolutism in religion. The absolute monarch attempts to establish some sort of agreement with the established religious. Okay. Those are the characteristics. Okay. Good. Let's see, other questions. Rachel, you have a question about Montesquieu. Montesquieu, the main idea that Montesquieu offers is the idea of separation of powers and checks on governments. Montesquieu looks to Britain in the middle of the 18th century, and he sees Britain just developed in the 18th century to the point where there are various branches of government. Each branch has its own power, and the branches have a check on the other to make sure that the other branches can't get too powerful. And so he sees this, and he this is what he includes in the spirit of the law. This is the ideal form of government. Okay, we can't be pumped until we get this over with. Guys, relax, breathe, 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 breathe. I know you guys are freaking out. I know you guys are thinking this is going to be the worst thing in the world. I know you guys are thinking this is going to be impossible. It's not. You guys are going to do fine on this. I promise. I promise. Okay. Yeah, sophomore slam is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. Is there a difference between constitutionalism and constitutional monarchy? Meaning constitutional monarchy means that the monarchy exists and it is limited by specific laws. That's what it is. Just like constitutionalism. That's what it is. Okay. Other questions from sophomores? We'll stay on for, I don't know, another 10 minutes or so. Okay. Adam Smith. Okay. Adam Smith offers a number of different ideas. First of all, Adam Smith is the first one to really offer the idea of free market economic developments, meaning he believes that government shouldn't have a role in economic development. That, again, is an idea that will be used primarily by many governments through the early 20th century. It's up to the economies themselves to regulate themselves. Next, we talked about the invisible hand, and we talked about the fact that for Adam Smith, competition and radical and self-interest is important because that leads to economic growth. Self-interest meaning you yourself want to do well, you want to succeed. And the fact that you want to succeed, particularly, we talked about the fact that Adam Smith differentiates between domestic and international economies. He wants to focus on domestic investment because that's going to help the domestic economy. But because you want to do well, that means you're going to have an effect that the entire economy is going to do well. Competition is also good because that means you're going to be competing you're going to be competing for business. Oh, Kayla, yeah, you're right. This is for A. This is not for H. Okay, this is not for the H level class. Okay, so this is for the A level. So H level, don't freak out. Okay, got it. H class. Okay. So those are the major beliefs that he believes in. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so what were the ideas of Rousseau? So Rousseau has a bunch of different ideas. Again, the textbook mentions a couple of these ideas. First of all, Rousseau does not believe that the Enlightenment was something that was positive. He believes that the Enlightenment was negative. He believes in really a direct democracy as opposed to a representational democracy. He believes that government comes from the consent of the governed, which is really what John Locke, again, believes. Locke believes that government derives its power from the people, and this is what Locke says. And David, you're going to find this difficult, I know, but for Locke, if the people, right, if the people don't think that government is working for their goal, then according to him, they can overthrow government, meaning the government derives its power from the consent of the governed. That's something that John Locke develops, okay? And Rousseau believes that as well. He believes in direct democracy, meaning Rousseau believes in that people should have a direct say in government as opposed to electing people to represent them in governments. Those are the ideas of Rousseau. Okay. I'm not going to give you quotes from the primary sources on the test. So, okay. I'm not going to do that. You don't need to know about the Peace of Augsburg. You don't need to know about women are not going to be on the Enlightenment. We will cover women in the Enlightenment in class, but you do not need to know about it. Let's see. What does the Anabaptists have to do with the Protestant Reformation? The Anabaptists, as we said in class, were a more radical form of the Protestant Reformation in that they really reject both ideas that the Catholic Church as well as Luther, Zwingli, and others adopt concerning infant baptism for the Anabaptists. They believe in baptism only through consent, meaning you have to agree to it as an adult to the ideas of Christianity. You can't just be subsumed into the religion itself. Anabaptists also have radical ideas, what we call the Schleifen Confession. They don't believe in participation in government. They don't take oaths. They are a peaceful, loving group. They don't want to get involved in death, in death and in war. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. Other questions. Blah, blah, blah. We just have a couple of minutes left. Let's see. Again, women are not going to be on the exam. Other questions. Rachel's asking about Beccaria and Voltaire, meaning you just, again, have a very broad sense of what Beccaria says. So yes, again, just a very, very broad sense of what he has to say. I'm not going to hold you to it. The reformation of criminal justice reform, I think that's, again, the broad sense is what you should know. But beyond that, I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to hold you to it. Can you explain what the relevance of the other early modern governments were? How were they relevant from David? I assume you're talking about Austria, Prussia, Russia. Look, on a test, I may ask you to assess one government in light of another, or one government in light of a theory or a series of theories that we offered. So, in terms of the relevance of other early modern governments, that's what I'm going to ask. And looking at models of how governments developed, I think is useful to see the way that, and this is something that the H class wrote about, really was the way in which England is a unique experience compared to Russia, Prussia, Austria. Okay. Does A need to know Russia and Prussia? No, that's for the honors classes. Okay. Can I summarize Kant? I already summarized Kant a little while ago, so I'm not going to do that. Shoshi, calm down. Calm down. Okay. I already summarized Kant. I'm not going to go back and summarize Kant again. You can go back and watch the video. Blah, 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 blah. What else? What else is out there? Other questions? This review makes me more stressed. This is an issue. Why? Why is that an issue? It's not, you just need to know every single detail about everything we learned in class, everything you read about in the textbook, and that's all. So, guys, you're freaking out too much. I promise you. This is not, first of all, remember, you have the reading, okay? The reading, there are questions of the reading, and that's a significant chunk of the test. So, am I making stuff up on the spot? I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Am I making stuff up on the spot? No, I'm just remembering everything. That's all. You guys just need to calm down a little bit. You need to calm down. You've never heard any of this before. Sure. Right. Yes. There's a lot of stuff. There's stuff that's in the textbook. There's stuff that you're responsible for in the textbook, and we're not getting to everything in class. That's absolutely clear, and that's absolutely expected. We just can't. We just don't have the time to get through. but we just don't have the time to get through everything in class, and that's the reality. So, so there's going to be stuff in the textbook that you were to read. Again, you had that responsibility. Review sheet is over 17 pages. That doesn't sound like a review sheet anymore. That sounds like, I don't know, a book. So you know, this is not simple. This is not easy. But that's what it is. Again, did we cover everything in class? No, meaning you have a lot of stuff in the textbook. You have some stuff in the textbook. Some stuff in the textbook we covered in class. You learn stuff from each other, and that's fine. Again, what I mentioned here, in terms of all of this, there's absolutely no reason, there's no way that in any way, shape, or form that you can mention even a quarter of what I discussed tonight on the test. It's impossible. Again, the focal point of the test is to show me that you know something, to show me that that you have an idea of what you're talking about. I'm not expecting comprehensiveness on the exam. I'm expecting thoughtful answers, and that's fine. I'm not going to, again, what I mentioned here in the live stream tonight is literally almost everything that was mentioned, discussed in some way, shape, or form in class, in the reading that you had at home, the reading you have in class. You guys are not expected to know all of it, to remember all of it, to write all of it. I want to make that clear. Is that clear to everybody? I just want to make that very clear. The test is not asking you to remember everything. Looking at, everyone is asking for previous review sheets. I'm not so sure that's going to be helpful. You can try, but I'm not so sure. Thank you, Julia. I want to know if that's clear from the sophomores. Okay. Again, everything is of equal weight. So essays are 30%. 30% is the exam. No, you can't see old tests of mine. Okay. Yes, essays are equals to tests. Okay. Okay, any other questions? Any other question? Any other questions before we finish? Okay. Can we get, guys, let me be clear about the essays. You submitted the essays to me last week, on Wednesday of last week, for the honors class. I will get them back to you as soon as I can. But you also have to know that it takes some time to grade them. So I will try to get them back to you tonight. Okay. And I will do my best. Okay. So any other questions? Okay. If there are no more questions, then I think we will end this. Okay. Okay. Oh, here, question from, what if I was taught the governments incorrectly? Again, the focal point will be on meaning for the honors class. The focal point will be in the exam to ask you about and for you to focus on the governments that you did, that you yourself read about and that you were assigned to. the you will have an opportunity to show that what you know about yours, and you'll be asked to reference other aspects of the readings that you were taught. From what I've looked at so far and from the papers that I've seen, what you guys have seems to be perfectly fine in terms of understanding the other governments. Okay. You do need to know all of them. You need to know all of them. You need to know the general parameters of what was said. You need to know the general parameters of what was taught. But again, I'm not expecting you to know every single detail about it. You have to know the general parameters, the general ideas, the general focal points of what happens. Again, this is for honors in Prussia, in Russia, in amongst the Austrians also. Again, but do you have to know every single detail? Absolutely not. That's what I think you guys are getting caught up on. Okay. Okay. If there aren't any more questions, we're going to end this right now. Let's see. From Shia, dislike the video. Sorry, Doc. Maybe that's not the best thing to say when someone gives up an hour and a half of their evening to do this. Maybe, Shia, think about what you have to say before you say it. Probably not the best response. Okay. So yeah, okay. Before you go bashing the video and saying this wasn't that helpful, remember that we're giving up an hour and a half of our evening to do this. So think before you speak. Okay. Not such a great comment. Do I have class Thursday first period? I actually have a meeting first and second period, and on Thursday. Okay. Okay. So after being here for an hour and 37 minutes, and hopefully answering a lot of questions, hopefully trying to calm at least some of you down a little bit. The focal point, guys, is breathe and relax. The test does not define who you are as a student. The test does not define who you are as a person. The test is fair. I'm not expecting you to do superhuman things. I'm not expecting you to know everything. I'm not expecting you to remember everything. But I want you to relax. I'm here to help you. I'm here to make sure that you do well. I trust that you guys are going to do well. So have a good night, everybody. I will see you all in school tomorrow.